Over to Europe, where Russia is blaming Ukraine for deadly railway blasts that killed 7 people and injured dozens over the weekend. The incident took place in the Bryansk near the Ukrainian border. A road bridge collapsed onto train tracks, derailing a passenger train. Russia's investigative committee calls it a terror attack and said it was carried out under orders from the Kiev regime. Authorities recovered explosive fragments and are interviewing survivors and witnesses. Just hours later, another blast hit a rail bridge in the Kursk, derailing a freight train and injuring the driver. Meanwhile, Ukraine's SBU security service has claimed responsibility for a strike on the Crimea bridge. They say underwater explosives damaged pillars of the strategic road and rail link. Ukraine claims Russia uses these routes to move troops and weapons to the front lines. The Kremlin says investigations into the attacks are still underway. We're now joined by Cliff Smith, who is a national security and government affairs professional located in Washington, D.C. Cliff, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We have seen all this diplomacy go on in the past 24 hours, Cliff, with the second round of direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. However, allegations of war crimes, allegations of terrorism seem to continue to fly between both sides. What's your reaction to the attitude of each country to one another and the hopes of a possible peace deal being negotiated between the two countries amidst this violence, which seems to be escalating?
I'm not sure the violence is really escalating in any meaningful sense. The violence was escalated in February of 2022 and hasn't really abated since. Russia invaded Ukraine, a sovereign country, and has sought to destroy it. They have been explicit about this for a very long time. Very little has changed in that regard. The only thing that has changed is the posture of some of Ukraine's friends, including the United States, which believed that there was a peace deal to be made, frankly, in spite of much of the evidence. The Trump administration came in saying they could solve this in 24 hours. It was always a fantasy. It was never true. And we've just seen that play out in very real ways. The Russians, if anything, came in thinking they could get even more than they had already gained because of that stance, and have continued to push that continually. I don't think that the talks that are ongoing currently have a realistic chance of ending the war, because Russia has fundamentally not accepted the idea that Ukraine is a sovereign country that exists on its own and should, something they agreed to decades ago, and the Ukraine has tried to chart its own course in ways that Russia doesn't like. There's a saying that says Russia only believes in borders if there's Russian troops on both sides of the border. That seems to be their only acceptable outcome. And as long as that's Russia's only acceptable outcome, we are going to see this fight continue. Really, is what needs to be done is Russia needs to change its war aims.
Yes, and Cliff, we've seen Russia call it the Kiev regime, which caused these bridges to collapse. When we're talking about information warfare, how are both Russia and Ukraine utilizing this? And what impact does this have on international perceptions?
Well, I mean, clearly Russia wants to minimize its own atrocities and its own ongoing, aggression against Ukraine. I mean, look, a bridge in a war that is being used to transport material and troops to the front lines is a legitimate target. Now, whether the fallout from a bridge blowing up hurts others is unfortunate, but a sad reality of war. The real question is who is at fault for the war? Who is the aggressor? Who is the one that is willing to create peace, and who's not? Russia does these things as a matter of course to Ukraine. I was in Ukraine a few months ago. I was in Kharkiv, which is a large Ukrainian city just 20 miles from the Russian border. The amount of damage done to Kharkiv, which is not near the front lines, or has not been in the front lines for several years anyway, and continuing to be done to civilian infrastructure that has no military purpose, was frankly shocking, and was something that happened as a matter of course all the time. Russia's looking to create sort of a false equivalence between the two. Now, Is that effective? Yeah, to some degree it is, sadly. I definitely see those kinds of arguments popping up, trying to blithely, say that they're all the same, trying to say that, oh, all sides are doing this when there's meaningful differences. Hitting a bridge that may or may not, depending on if you believe Russia, have hurt, civilians on a train, it's most unfortunate, but it's simply not the same as, for example, when I was in Kharkiv, witnessing a large hardware store which was blown up, had no military purpose, and 16 Ukrainians died. This was just last year, and I could cite many other examples. But this is the sad reality of war. I do hope for an end to the war, but I hope for an end to a war where it is made clear that the sovereignty of countries is important. It's the same I feel with India and Pakistan, frankly, and it's a very similar situation between Russia and Ukraine.
I want to briefly talk about this Operation Spiderweb, which you've seen over the past 48 hours. Russia are now launching an investigation into it. Declined to give the numbers right now. A very impressive operation from the Ukrainians. What does it say about their military capabilities when some would say that the international narrative was that it was falling apart for the Ukraine on the battlefield?
Yeah, I think that was always a Russian talking point. That was the case, but it never was true. The truth of the matter is Ukraine, while it is true that it is very heavily reliant on international aid from the U.S., from the EU, from a few others, while that is true, the idea that they were somehow out of cards, as President Trump once put it, was never true. And it was obvious to anybody that's actually visited on the ground and actually talked to people there. Not only are they dedicated to fighting, but they are innovating at a rate, frankly, far faster than the Russians are. And they have been able to survive this long because they have been able to change to and adapt to changing circumstances. This is a key example. I mean, everybody knew that drones were a significant, weapon on the battlefields before the war in Ukraine and in Russia. But the nature of those drones, their importance has changed rapidly. And it's largely because of Ukrainian intervention. I mean, yes, others have innovated as well, but I mean, the speed and the importance of those innovations have changed and have become much more important to the war. And Ukraine's been winning on that front, and they're continuing. While I was in Kyiv a few months ago, I visited actually what amounted to a drone innovation facility where they were learning to make drones more effective, cheaper, to take out, more expensive, clunkier drones, and they were really making amazing progress. I don't want to take away the fact, I mean, it is true, Russia's innovating too. This is a tit for tat, back and forth, both sides are doing their thing. But this is a clear sign that Russia simply was not prepared for the level of innovation and the level of cunning, frankly, that the Ukrainians have. And they, probably with a few $1 million have taken out not only billions of dollars of Russian military assets, but they've also, probably caused the Russians to spend an inordinate amount of time figuring out how to guard other assets inside Russia that they previously didn't think they needed to. It was a huge win, and it will change the dynamics of the war. To what degree? That remains to be seen.
And Cliff, obviously, you said that previously said that this war has maintained a steady pace when it comes to the conflict. However, this is such a substantial military operation for the Ukrainians. Is there a risk that Russia will reply in such a way, in a excessive way, in a way that it feels like it needs to get its own back on the Ukrainians?
I have no doubt that the Russians will do something to try to make some sort of symbolic, big attack to, sort of reset the narrative in a sense. I have no doubt that'll happen. However, I do not think it'll have the same level of impact because, frankly, Russia's already been doing everything it can to destroy Ukraine, and it has been for some time. And the idea that they have some sort of substantial, military asset just sitting here waiting to, increase and to, heighten the situation is just not true. They already have been throwing pretty much everything they have. Yes, it is true that they have not launched nuclear weapons, but it is true that they threatened to do so about, 1 million times. I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it's so common that nobody really takes it seriously anymore, and it's not in their best interest. They know that would be the one thing they could do, which could turn almost 100% of the world community against them. So they won't do it. They can't do it. And so really, it's just a matter of them, probably doing some kind of spectacular attack that will, hurt a lot of probably innocent civilians. But it's unlikely that they're going to do anything that really changes the war, because if they had the ability to do anything that really changed their fortunes on the ground, they would have done it. They've been pressing the envelope for some time. I was in Kyiv when President Trump was on the phone with Vladimir Putin, and a few hours later, they were hitting Kyiv with drones. They do that. They are attacking every city in Ukraine when they get a chance on a frequent basis. So, how are you going to escalate that? I mean, yeah, they can throw a whole bunch of drones at one place or another. They can try to make a move in the front line to move things a few miles here or there, a few kilometers, I should say. But it's not going to change the calculation, I don't think, in the same way the Ukrainian attack on Russia's bombers has done.
Yes, and Cliff, there's been mainly US officials and also Zelensky saying that this war will be solved through diplomacy and not the battlefield. We are running out of time, but on the diplomatic front, how do you see this progressing? How have you evaluated the progress over the past 48 hours where we did see those second round of peace talks with Russia and Ukraine, and we've seen a new prisoner swap arranged? What are your thoughts?
Diplomatic progress is great, provided it's sustainable. And there is no evidence at this point that any diplomatic progress, beyond minor things like prisoner exchanges, I don't want to take away the importance of them, but they're not going to solve the war. It's ephemeral until, basically the Ukrainians have decided to capitulate, which they haven't and shouldn't, or the Russians think they have no other option but to seek a truce that will leave them well short of their stated aims. They have to change their mind about the outcome of the war. And when you have one side wanting to survive and the other side wanting the other one dead, it gets really tricky. You basically need one side to have a victory and to change the other person's mind about the desired outcome of the war. And I don't see that happening in the short term. Russia has a history of pushing way too far on a variety of fronts. I mean, that is what caused them to collapse in 1917 and again in 1990-91. And do I expect that to happen right now? No. But I do think that it's going to take a massive amount of internal pressure that will really shake the foundations of Russia for this thing to end.
Cliff Smith, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to get your insight on the program. We now